You're listening to Season 10 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 to today.
This is episode 10.52, Cassarelia, and we're your hosts. I'm Tom, longtime Gundam fan, and here to answer the questions no one is asking.
And I'm Nina, wondering what the number of years cutoff is for being a longtime Gundam fan, and also wondering how it's possible that there is always more to say. Mobile Suit Breakdown is made possible by our pretty perspicacious paying subscribers. Thank you all, and special thanks to our newest patrons, Clockty, Chantarelle, Bibbs McF, Cool Pinniped, Shablam, Nephilim, and Derek S. You keep us Genki. Longtime listeners know that we usually take a couple of months between seasons to rest and recover, catch up on the business side of things, and do the preliminary research and preparation for the coming season, which will be 1994's G Gundam. However, this time there is an added wrinkle. We each have a list of research topics that we wanted to cover this season but didn't manage to get to. So our plan is to release these research pieces as standalone bonuses during the hiatus.
But before that, we have questions to answer. And the original plan was to answer them all this week. But it turns out you sent in some very thought-provoking questions, and we like talking to each other, so we wound up recording about 2 podcasts worth of answers. And that was without even getting to the biggest and juiciest of all of the questions. So this week, you're getting episode 10.52 Q&A Part 1. Part 2 will be next week, and in 3 weeks, hopefully, we'll do our level best to look back at the whole Tomino era of Gundam, as we ask ourselves what it all meant. It is the kind of question a critic could spend their whole career trying to answer, but I figure we can wrap it up in an hour or so of freeform discussion.
One could argue that everything we've done up to this point has been an attempt to answer that question.
6 years and counting.
Almost 7 now. However many hundreds of hours worth of podcast episodes and discussion.
Now, the questions.
A big thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We got everything from very deep, insightful questions to very strange, silly questions. But even the strange and silly are fun to answer, so here we are. Our first question comes from Jeremy. Greetings, Mobile Suit Breakdown. My early 2000s Gundam fandom was mostly preoccupied with the OVAs, movies, and series localized for the US. In the absence of official releases, awareness of titles like Double Zeta, Gundam X, Turn A consisted entirely of online vibes. Victory Gundam in particular seemed to suffer from an unpopular reputation, and decades later remained the single series OVA movie from the 80s and 90s that I never got around to watching. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the gap between what you heard about Victory before watching it and the show when you finally watched it. Which of the series on the podcast so far has had the biggest gap between perceived reputation beforehand and the final experience of watching it? Ooh, this is difficult, in particular because I haven't been enmeshed in the fandom for that long, and I generally discount broad opinions of media as being more combative even than people really feel, because it's fun to be combative on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Having finished it, I don't think Victory is a particularly strong entry in the Gundam franchise. There were certainly things I liked about it very much, but it's not one that I would recommend to others.
Well, Victory is hard to recommend, and that's not necessarily just a dig at its quality. It's just that there's no aspect of it in which it is particularly strong compared to other Gundam series. If you are really into the animation, Victory doesn't have the best animation. If you're really into the charismatic characters, Victory doesn't really have them either. If you like depressed teenage space psychics, you're not going to find many of them in Victory. So I guess unless you are really into Haro, Victory just doesn't stand out that much from any of the other series.
We're going to come back to talking about Haro. But in terms of reputation, I don't think it had the biggest gap. Because as we will get to in the very next question, some people told me, oh, you will hate Victory. I don't hate Victory.
Hate's a very strong word.
The biggest gaps, I'm going to surprise some people here, maybe not. I thought one of the biggest gaps for me was Char's counterattack, mainly because people are so obsessed with it. And by the time we were done covering it, I was sick of it and never wanted to talk about it again. I also felt a little underwhelmed by Stardust Memory, and that's one that has a pretty strong cheerleading contingent. And it was fine. There were parts of it I enjoyed very much, but didn't wow me as much as the hype led me to believe it would. On the other side, the general opinion of Double Zeta, at least from early in the podcast, from when I first started really delving into Gundam, seemed very negative. And then I enjoyed Double Zeta very much and thought it was great.
I know this is mostly a question for Nina because I have watched all of this stuff before, but I will say from my own perspective, I do think Victory is the one with the biggest gap between my impressions and those of the fandom at large, or at least the vocally online contingent thereof. Victory is often described as a depressing show, Kill 'Em All Tomino at his most bloodthirsty, but if anything, the show feels really bloodless to me. Like
until the end.
Well, it's not the... Yeah. The end is... Look, episodes 50 and 51 are an outlier and should not be counted. They need to be removed from the data set before we can talk about Victory. But no, like, yeah, people die. A lot of people die. And yeah, probably more named hero side characters do die throughout the course of Victory than in any other Gundam show we've watched, but that's kind of the whole problem. They die at such a rapid pace, and there are so many of them that you never get attached to any of them, and neither do the characters, really. To the extent that Uso gets really broken up over the deaths of the Shrikes, it feels hollow, because we haven't really seen him interacting with them. We haven't seen them interacting with each other. We don't know who these people are. And even when there are big emotional moments, they get siloed and sanitized in weird ways. Like, there's this screenshot that people love to repost from Victory, and it's Uso sitting in his cockpit, and the text says, Uso wept until he could weep no more. That's not even in the show proper. That's from a Last Time On flashback of a scene that never appears in the previous episode.
I do think you are being slightly harder on the show than it deserves, mainly because this is a problem that gets worse over the course of the show and is particularly bad toward the end. His earlier interactions with the Shrikes do feel more personal, and they make a point of having him, Uso, display a lot more emotion earlier in the show in response to the deaths. Think about the funeral that they have and someone lifting up Shakti so she can put lipstick on one of the Shrikes and like...
Yeah, but that's a character Uso has spoken a total of like 10 words to for 20 seconds earlier that episode. That's what I mean about it feeling unearned. It's a beautiful, touching moment at the funeral, but we don't know... I can't even remember which Shrike that was.
Well, but how well did we know Ryu Hosei when he died? Like,
he'd been around for like 20 episodes.
Right,
he'd been a mentor figure to Bright and to the other pilots. He'd been wounded for several episodes, and we'd seen him struggling to get back out there to fight because he's desperate to protect his friends.
Okay, so I can't argue with Tom about previous Gundam shows because he remembers them better than me. Not fair. I still think that Victory did a better job conveying the emotional impact of those deaths in the first maybe third of the show. And then I don't know whether this was on purpose or whether they just couldn't fit in everything that they wanted to fit in, but lost it as the show progressed. And yes, by the end, these deaths didn't really feel impactful to us because they didn't particularly feel impactful to the characters themselves.
They managed to hit pretty heavily with Oliver, Junko, and Mira. I'll grant it that. But again, maybe not as heavy as it could have done. And maybe a lot of that comes down to Uso just being a very stoic protagonist who, for the most part, doesn't talk to anyone about his feelings.
Related to this previous question, Bun of Babylon writes, Nina, right at the start, I told you on Twitter that you'd hate Victory. Would I have been right if you didn't have to watch it critically? And are you now ready to embrace your role as society's space mother, or push back against the blood moon curse that is womanhood? I don't think I'd have hated it. However, I probably wouldn't have finished it. If this had just been an anime that I was checking out for funsies, I almost certainly would have stopped long before finishing the show.
Mm-hmm.
For the reasons that I already mentioned. And luckily for me, I do not subscribe to Tomino's restrictive ideas about womanhood. I have other options. Then again, grifting does seem like the way to get ahead right now. Maybe I should start a space mommy cult.
I don't think it worked out particularly well for Maria or the men handling her, so I'm not sure I'm on board with this.
Oh, I'm not going to be handled. I'm going to do it different.
Rip to Queen Maria, but you're different. Greener221 asks, much of the blame for the show's strangeness tends to be put at the feet of Tomino Yoshiyuki, but like Zeta and Double Zeta Gundam before it, it feels like it could be more a product of the writing team interpreting Tomino's will, even if you might claim that there was a cult of personality around a particularly difficult director. So where and why do you think Okeya Akira, Sonoda Hideki, and etc.'s vision of the characters and setting differed from Tomino's, and were we better or worse off for their ghost revisions? And as I mentioned on the prior episode, according to Tomino himself, he actually had a more heavy-handed role in the writing of this show than it sounds like he's had in prior ones. Certainly we know that by the end of Double Zeta, he was very hands-off with those writers, and seems to have been for a lot of Zeta as well. There's some great anecdotes that came out of that about writers, pushing back against Tomino's desire to kill off characters willy-nilly, or contrary-wise, insisting that here and now is the right time narratively for this character to die. And at least in the Zeta era, it seems like the writers were winning those arguments some of the time. By Victory, it's harder to tell. According to Tomino, he was rewriting basically everything, and the interviews I've seen with Sonoda and Okeya, etc., I don't recall them talking much about specific things that they contributed to the show.
Yeah, I couldn't even begin to guess at a proper answer to this question. But my general feeling is that if a team can't play nicely together, if a team is not collaborating well and getting on the same wavelength, I prefer the cohesiveness of a single vision to the occasional tug-of-war feeling.
Based on our experience of Gundam and what I think I know about the writing process for the various shows and movies, it really seems like they're at their best when the writers have enough authority, independence on the project to be able to push back and assert themselves vis-a-vis the chief director. We know that on First Gundam, for instance, many iconic characters, many really good plot arcs, really some of the best episodes of the show were done almost entirely without Tomino's writing input. Zeta and Double Zeta especially, you can really see the different styles of the different writers making their mark on the show. The two examples I can think of where, based on what we know about the production, it seems like Tomino did significant rewriting of other people's scripts are Formula 91 and Victory, which I think are two of the worst written Gundam projects we've encountered so far. On the other hand, I think Char's Counterattack is marvelously written, and I believe that's entirely Tomino's script. So it seems like he's really good when he's writing his own ideas, and he's really good when he's directing other people's scripts, but when he starts trying to rewrite other people's work, that's when he starts to lose me. Though this question does bring up a related point that I've been meaning to talk about for ages, and it's the idea of, when we say Tomino, sometimes we mean Tomino the guy, who is alive and walking around today, and sometimes we just use him as handy shorthand for the collective author of this work, whichever individual person may have been responsible for the thing we're currently talking about. Tomino the team. And that's, probably not the best habit to be in, but it's one that the Gundam fandom as a whole is guilty of.
Greener goes on to say, I've felt ever since I finished this show that it's like an exaggerated version of Zeta Gundam, with its themes of womanhood, eco-terrorism, and weaponized enlightenment through space travel. Would you agree with that sentiment? If so, do you think it's more or less successful at tackling these topics than Zeta was. I hadn't really thought about that connection. I suppose I look at them more from this meta perspective where Zeta is kind of concerned with the enemy within. Zeta is concerned with like creeping authoritarianism and fascism from inside of what are supposed to be liberal institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Victory has a very clear like enemy without to fight, and little people caught up in big events kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. They do touch on many of the same themes, though, especially the ones identified in the question. But Zeta, to my mind, is much more interested in pointing a mirror at the world of the mid-1980s and saying, hey, you got a lot of problems. Whereas Victory is kind of trying to offer answers, and I don't think it's very successful in doing so.
Finally, Greener asks, do you think Tomino inspired or was inspired by Aum Shinrikyo? Aum being a new religion that got involved in terrorism in the mid-90s.
So I don't think Tomino was inspired by Aum. The subway sarin gas attacks didn't happen until 1995, so those wouldn't have inspired Victory, and Aum was pretty marginal before those attacks. I don't think it was particularly well known. However, I think it's almost definite that Tomino was inspired by the Japanese new religious movement in general.
There are so many.
There are so many.
And this is why I do those quick surveys of what was going on in the world between and around each series, because while I don't think either necessarily directly influenced the other, they are both coming out of the same historical and sociocultural soup. 70s activism and terrorist groups and new religions. We will almost certainly delve deeper into that next season when it's more temporally relevant.
And I think I've read assessments of Aum and its origins which suggest that it may have been inspired partly by science fiction ideas of psychics and new types and other kinds of post-human beings. So
it's possible that someone involved in Aum was inspired by Gundam.
I think that's very plausible.
Especially because now that I think of it, we are in the 1990s getting into the generation of adults who watched a Gundam as children. So, I guess that is possible.
And I don't have the quote in front of me, but I actually believe that Tomino himself has accepted partial responsibility for inspiring Aum. So, he may or may not have inspired them, but he seems to think that he did. He is not the only Japanese science fiction writer to have said so, though.
Mark writes, hi folks, I only have one question this time, aside from please talk about the bike battleships more, which isn't actually a question. But a quick aside, happy news for Mark. One of the research pieces that I would like to do during the hiatus is on the history of motocross in Japan. So, not battleships per se, but, Anyway, there's a little bit of soapboxing in V Gundam about gender roles and how women are supposed to stay home raising babies while men do the fighting. But I can't help noticing that Victory Gundam has a lot of fighting ladies, including entire teams of female pilots and plenty of rank-and-file female soldiers, rather than just the rare, exceptional one like Shima in 0083. Do you feel the on-screen representation undercuts or counters the ideas in the dialogue? What do you think they're trying to say in visual terms? Was this just an excuse to draw lots of pretty women? And there was a related question from Justin P. I will freely admit I've always considered Victory one of the Gundams that handles its women characters and the topic of womanhood very badly, possibly the worst among all Gundams. Do you agree with that assessment in comparison with other Gundams you've watched? I think that the show, in its representations of women, is kind of trying to thread the needle on career women and motherhood. And I look again to Takarazuka as an example. These are the all-women theater companies that are quite famous in Japan, because as part of trying to dispel their reputation as being full of lesbians, it is traditional for Takarazuka actresses to retire in their early 30s and get married and have babies. I really see this show as Tomino trying to reconcile his own beliefs and opinions about womanhood and motherhood and what women want, and the opinions and beliefs that he grew up with, right? With contemporary women and social trends of the early 90s, where we see more women working and more women postponing motherhood. I don't think he does this very successfully, but I do think he's grappling with these competing ideas and kind of trying to reconcile the two.
I also think that at around this time, Tomino's own two daughters would have been roughly in their late teens or early 20s. He may have had very personal reasons to be meditating on a woman's role in society. To me, what distinguishes Tomino's Gundam from its contemporaries like 0080, 0083, or SD is that for better or worse, Tomino is aware that there are questions to ask about society in general, about gender. There are points of internal contradiction that need to be resolved, or perhaps that cannot be resolved because we are creatures of contradiction. Many of his characters are overtly wrestling with their own gender or the displayed genders of other characters. Going back to First Gundam, you have Sayla and Bright talking about Sayla trying to prove that a woman can pilot just as well as a man, but even in that context, it's a lie. Sayla wasn't actually trying to do that, but it becomes convenient cover for her. Camille, Fa, Quattro, Rekoa, Emma, they're all talking about, like, what is the place of a woman? What is the role of a woman? What does gender have any role in the military? What is a man? What should a man be? And even into Victory, you get your Katajinas and your Lupes. You get these women whose idea of self, idea of the world, idea of womanhood is very contradictory and subject to serious interrogation.
Yeah, I, for the most part, don't think that Victory handles women worse than other series, but I think it states what it's saying more explicitly. Whereas in the other series, often those comments are left more up to interpretation. Not always, but Victory is quite didactic about it at times. The one way in which they are absolutely, definitely way worse is the implication that women who thwart their motherhood desire become sexual predators.
That one's pretty bad, yeah.
I don't remember anything anywhere close to that bad in the previous Gundams, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm not the one to go to for remembering previous shows.
And by contrast, if you look at 0083, like, in Stardust Memory, gender is the way it is. Ko asks, what kind of man will I become? He's aware that there are different kinds of options for him, but he's not asking, like, fundamental questions the way Uso is asking, what is a man, and should we even have them anymore? So Tomino is posing questions. One person in our Discord posited that over time and into Victory, Tomino is asking more complex questions, but not getting any better answers. And I think it's more that he's asking the same questions with greater urgency, because the answers he's reaching are not resolving the contradictions, and that's making him very nervous.
Mark asks as a bonus topic, we've now had one UC Gundam relaunch where the bad guys are inspired by ancient Babylon, and another which references an ancient Tibetan kingdom and leans on a lot of Buddhist imagery. If the Universal Century continued in this vein, which ancient civilizations would you each like to see used as inspiration for genocidal fascist space empire? Oh dear.
Gosh. Well, obviously not Rome. Rome is way overplayed for genocidal space fascist empire.
But it can sometimes feel a bit racist to start pulling on other ones.
I mean, we know Tomino is desperate to do some Mesoamerican culture, but he probably shouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, like, Victory was obsessed with Mexico, and you could do the Aztecs, but I don't trust them to do a good job with that.
Didn't Mel Gibson already do that?
Oh, did he?
Isn't that kind of what Apocalypto was?
I don't know. I don't pay attention to that man.
Anyway, I think you could do some pretty cool, weird stuff with, like, ancient Celts. I think that'd be pretty cool. I feel like I'm just going counterclockwise around the Mediterranean. Like, yep, Celts would be cool. Celtiberians. Ooh, Carthaginians. We haven't done Carthaginians. Nobody ever does Carthage. Ptolemaic Egypt.
Egypt could be cool. Although you know they would have a mobile armor that's just a giant pyramid flying creepily through space.
Nina.
What? Does that exist later? Does that happen later? Am I predicting future Gundam again?
Let's move on to the next question. No, wait. I know the question prompt said ancient civilization, but I'm gonna interpret that kind of loosely. What about the Mongols? They're just, steppe nomads in general. Give us a federation based on the crumbling Byzantine Empire. A settled people facing nomadic warrior tribes roaming the solar system in hollowed-out asteroids or motherships made of defunct colony cylinders. All the children are born in the cockpit, the way steppe riders were said to be born in the saddle.
Then all the ships really would be named for horses. You know which ancient civilizations, at least from an American perspective, seem not to get nearly enough love is South Asia and Southeast Asia. They deserve some attention, or rather, to be really cool villains.
I could see it. Can you imagine a mobile suit or mobile armor based on the Barong?
Yes. Oh, so cool. Or even just think of the aesthetics of a bunch of those old Southeast Asian Hindu temples, right? Beautiful and so different from the aesthetics we've seen so far.
JR asks, do you think that, in creating Zanskar, Tomino succeeded in creating a faction that was a clean break from the ideas presented by Zeon throughout the Gundam franchise so far? Does that success or failure make the show better or worse? And I would say yes. In terms of the things that I think of with Zeon, besides the Zabi family, Space Noid independence, yeah. They've got it. That's de facto established. The Space Noids won. The Earth Federation is run from the moon. And anyway, doesn't really seem to have any influence on life in the colonies. As for new typeism, nobody bats an eye at half the cast suddenly developing psychic radio communication. And the authorities, Mubarak, etc., treat Uso's new type abilities very matter-of-factly. And then when I think of what Victory is about religion. Victory is about family. Victory is about women and soil. So yeah, I think it is a pretty stark pivot.
And I liked that about it. I liked that it felt as though we were doing something different instead of just retreading the same someone's reviving Zeon again ground.
I did like that they were trying to do something different. Did you like the result? Did you feel like it succeeded at being a show about religion and women and all that other stuff I said?
Sort of. I wish they had done more with it, but I found the depictions of the Zanskar homeland and why the public supports Maria the way they do really compelling. And the fact that Kagati is kind of a true believer.
Yeah.
He's not just some conniving guy standing behind the throne and manipulating everything. He truly believes in what he's trying to accomplish.
And they could have done so much more with that.
Yes. I also think that one of the show's foundational premises that most people just want to be let alone to live in peace, and that most people don't get involved in the fighting unless it threatens their ability to do that, is pretty spot on.
We didn't get into this when we talked about it on the podcast, but that whole mass healing ceremony that Maria conducts, imagine if that had been faked. Maybe it was. Imagine Kagati, getting a bunch of actors to pretend to be injured and then pretend to be healed. That could have added some interesting nuance to the whole Zanskar storyline, the more so if he's also a true believer. If he feels the need to play it up, but also really believes in Mariaism. Gosh, imagine the show we could have had.
Even the bits that we get, seeing all these very young child soldiers as Imperial guards guarding the palace. That cab driver who encourages Uso to go join up. Like, you should be in the armed forces, child. For the nation. Conveys so much. Very, shall we say, frugally.
There are also the ingredients necessary to tell a story about what inspires people to fight. We know the people of Zanskar are inspired by Maria. We are also told throughout the course of the show that Uso is a symbol of the League Militaire. Uso and the Gundam are out there inspiring people to fight. But then that doesn't mean anything. They never go anywhere with it. This never leads Uso's handlers to try to keep him away from the real battle because he's too valuable as a symbol.
But they also never really, trot him out to be inspiring for people.
Exactly.
We don't catch anybody like sneaking up to the Gundam to touch it for good luck or...
They could have really gone into the religious symbolism of the V2 as guardian angel.
We've wandered away from the original point somewhat. My opinion is that Victory did benefit from trying to make more of a clean break and not just be another Zeon revival type show.
But have you considered that true, authentic Zeonism has never been attempted before? This time, we'll get it right, for sure.
Cody asks, were there way more nuclear explosions throughout the series from Mobile Suit Destruction than I remember? Oliver hits a big tire. Nuke. Fan favorite Mizuho gets hit by a big tire. Nothing but tears. It seems like in the middle to end of the series, it was nothing but concerns about nuclear explosions, while in the beginning, it was never a concern. Did Casarelia become a nuclear crater half a dozen times from Uso's battles and I just forgot? I understand the storytelling explanation for the increase in stakes, but is there more of an explanation that I missed? I don't think so. Narrative convenience.
No, it does actually come up a little bit in those first few episodes, not because reactors are going nuclear, but they are talking about it a little bit. Uso is saying, oh, I need to avoid hitting the reactor so that it doesn't explode. So it's not completely absent, but you're right. It does just sort of take off during the Motorat arc, during the arc that is about cleansing the Earth. And it seems like what they're trying to do is establish a distinction between nuclear contamination and a clean Earth, that those are separate ideas and never shall they be mingled. But that every attempt to cleanse the Earth ultimately just ends up polluting it more. And once the Motorat arc ends, yes, there are still nuclear explosions from mobile suit reactors going off, but nobody makes a big deal about them. So I think the obsession with nuclear explosions is limited to that middle section.
Cobra Panic, who would like us to keep spreading the good word of Gwigsy, you got it, asks, Victory Gundam often showcased advancements in Minovsky particle beam technology, such as the Wings of Light or the Lean Horse Jr.'s front beam shield. What were some of your favorite new technologies of the series, and what kind of weaponry or techniques would you like to see in future Gundam series?
Oh, I think we gotta go back. We gotta go low-tech. We got beams coming out of every mobile orifice.
I like the beam shields, though.
Oh, come on. This is like when John Wick introduced the bulletproof jackets. They ruin everything.
Though my favorite fighting technique is perhaps one of the most low-tech of all, and it's using parts of the mobile suit as improvised projectiles. Just clubbing people with your detachable legs.
The only way you could go even further than where we are right now is if you had an enemy that was pure energy, like the Dredge from hit 2000 animated sci-fi action-adventure film Titan AE. But if we go the other direction, really indulge in those crunchy ballistics. Let's see those Vulcans spitting slugs. Let's unleash a Macross missile massacre that actually matters.
I loved the snaky dragon mobile suit. I don't remember its name.
The Dagorla.
Dagorla. Well, I liked the Dagorla a lot. I think, again, you have this sort of interchangeable parts aspect to it. And that interchangeability being a huge asset and something that makes it really difficult to combat this particular mobile suit. Somewhat in the other direction, I loved the Fujin and Raijin mobile suits, the ones that were based on gods and mythological figures from Japan. I would like to see more of that kind of thing. Yeah, my interests are less crunchy.
Cobra Panic also asks, as we inevitably approach the MSB karaoke bonus episode, I promise you we are not approaching that. What were some of your favorite songs of Victory Gundam? Opening, ending, or insert songs? Are any of them certified earworms compared to series or movies past?
I found the music largely unremarkable. By the end of this season of the podcast, I was singing along to Stand Up to the Victory, and I did like the song from the penultimate episode, the one that starts during the big self-sacrificing attack.
Yes, the insert song in the last two episodes is really good.
It had that rock power ballad vibe that was very fun.
It's the only one that really stood out to me.
And honestly, I still think that the opening song from First Gundam and Shagakuru are the best songs Gundam has ever produced. So, you're maybe asking the wrong people.
Solid Snack asks, how do you think a protagonist like Uso would have fared in previous series, like First Gundam, Zeta, War in the Pocket, Stardust Memory, or etc.? How do you think previous protagonists would have handled the events of Victory?
This one was really fun to think about. It brought to light that, in my opinion, several Gundam series, OVAs, movies, don't just have one protagonist. And so deciding who exactly we're comparing Uso to becomes quite interesting. But also, how many of these earlier conflicts Uso simply would not have been involved in? Like, I don't think Uso would have been involved in the events of CCA at all.
No.
Or Stardust Memory. I think in War in the Pocket, he would have turned in the Zeon soldiers.
He certainly would not have, helped Bernie the way Al does. Though, here's an alternative. What if he replaces Bernie instead of Al? He's drafted into the Zeon army, and he's made a pilot at a very young age.
And crash lands in hostile territory.
Right. Does he go undercover? Does he pretend to be a student at Al's school? Do they do the, here's the transfer student from side 3 storyline? I honestly don't see him getting involved in Zeta either. Uso's concerns are ultimately so parochial.
And personal.
That it's really, really hard to imagine him getting involved in anything except maybe First Gundam.
And F91.
F91 takes place entirely on 2 colonies, though.
Well, but imagine that Uso is a resident of one of those colonies.
Yeah.
He would have gotten involved in the resistance. It also involves a woman figurehead for a political movement. The other point of comparison that really stopped me in my tracks was the realization that of all the protagonists, the one whose circumstances, not personality, but circumstances, are most like Uso's is Judo. Absentee parents, used to being independent and fending for himself, impoverished, living on the fringes of society.
Yeah, if he were a city kid instead of a farm kid, he'd be a lot like Judo.
And Judo is a lot more goofy and rule-breaking and happy-go-lucky, and Uso seems significantly more serious. They have quite different personalities, but in terms of where they start out, what their life is like, they are very similar. Because every time I started thinking about, Amuro and Camille are both quite well off, going to fancy schools, living in relatively privileged circumstances. Their parents have good, well-paying jobs.
I think this gets at an important criticism of Victory vis-a-vis the other Gundam shows, and especially Zeta. Zeta is a sci-fi version of complex modern consumer society. The cities look like modern cities. The people act like modern people. They have jobs like modern people. The companies function like modern companies. The governments function or fail to function like modern governments. But Victory is pretty far removed from all of that. We don't see much of life on Earth. What we see of regular civilian life is people eking out an existence in the bombed-out ruins of Barcelona, special experimental underwater bubble city, secret refugees hiding in farms in a valley in Central Europe. I mean, I'm sure there are small rural farms in valleys in Central Europe, but there are not many Casarelias back in the 90s or now, and the ones that do exist, by definition, do not contain many people.
I'm honestly not sure. I'm quite sensitive to the fact that I've lived in cities or suburbs basically my whole life, and as a result tend to underestimate how much country there is out there and how many people live in it. It's the nature of cities that you get this big concentrated population, and the bulk of the population in most places lives in cities. But
I grew up in a pretty small rural village in farming country, and I gotta tell you, the lifestyle did not look anything like what Uso and his neighbors are doing.
well, no, they're doing off the grid
Yeah.
bunkers and stuff.
I suspect that to the average Japanese kid watching this show on TV in 1993, at a time when around 80% of Japan's population already lived in cities, Casarelia would have seemed more alien than the space colonies. Victory seems to be saying, if you want to live a good life, just find yourself a Casaurelia and have some babies, but that's not really one of the available options. It's just a nostalgic hallucination.
Other ones that I felt strongly about, again, War in the Pocket. I think Al would have been like Carl, would have been like some of the younger Highland kids, would have gotten involved if he'd been in a position to do so, but still would not have been a pilot. I think Cole would have been one of the Fedi pilots or Ligue Militaire pilots, one of the ones going, we can't let these new type kids show us up.
But Ko would not be the one saying that. He would be in the background, nodding in silent agreement, while a hot-blooded Mancha or South Burning type actually says it. It's easy to imagine Camille joining the Ligue Militaire.
With his underground magazines and...
Amuro probably doesn't get involved until Zanskar invades his colony.
But then would absolutely be part of the resistance to that invasion.
Unfortunately, I can't think of anybody on the Zanskar side for Amuro to really connect with, the way he connects with Char and with Lala. Hang on. Before the Lala incident, Amuro was more into the strong older lady type. He would have lost his dumb, horny teenaged mind the first time he met the Shrikes. And maybe after striking out with all of them, he would shoot his shot with Lupe, instantly fixing her, of course, before learning all about the relationship between masculinity and doing sick bike stunts from Duker Eek. That is the end of the questions for this week. We'll be back next week with more questions and more answers. Please listen to it. See, I can handle it. I can do the next time on. Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email hosts@GundamPodcast.com or look for links to our social media accounts on our website. And if you would like to support the show, please share us with your friends, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or support us financially at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. You can find links and more ways to help out at GundamPodcast.com/support. Thank you for listening. I don't think it worked out particularly well for Maria, but it
might work for us. This is it, the last asterisk, last episode. To answer the question.
Yes and no. I had come up with an and, but I forgot it. We were talking about things.
Tigress is scratching her chin on my sleeve.
Oh, well, you have a very scratchy jumpsuit on right now. It's a good shirt for scratching. She does that with my arm too, but I can't imagine my arm hair is as satisfying.
Tiger, no. You want it up here. You can sit in my lap. Behave yourself, or I will put you back on the floor. Tigress, I want you to purr so we can get you on the mic purring. I would love to get a recording of you purring, but you're not going to cooperate, are you?